Previously on the American Justice Podcast.
The attorneys and prosecutors make their strikes, and their rather sober jury is chosen. The next day, the trial begins with 12 jurors and 2 alternates who have never had a drop of happy juice and never taken drugs. And they associate with nothing but cops and all attend functions together, but have no predetermined opinions about anything, ever. I hear a train a-comin'. It's rolling round the bend.
I hear the train a-comin'. It's rolling around the bend. And I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on.
There is an epidemic in America's criminal justice system. The prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to American Justice. The American Justice Podcast Army works to free men and women wronged by the criminal justice system. It's not only about the innocent who have been imprisoned, but also the victims of the crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here's your host, Scott Pogensey.
Hello, AJ Army. Welcome back to your podcast. I'm going to warn everyone up front that this episode is going to be a long one. It's just because I'm going to play the complete opening and closing from the prosecution and the defense. I feel it's important for you to know exactly where they're coming from in their own words from their own mouths. All right, so let's get started. DJ, let's go.
Clean shirt, new shoes, and I don't know where I am going to. Silk suit, black tie, and I don't need a reason why. They come running just as fast as they can, 'cause every girl's crazy about a sharp-dressed man.
All right, this week we begin with a bang. The defense was never given a date of birth for witness Tim Baker, who was added at the last minute. He's going to be a state's expert witness. The defense knows nothing about his background. Isn't a date of birth one of the first damn things anyone asks you in the identification process? Like anywhere, ever? How incompetent can a group of, quote, professionals be? Why am I asking all of you? If any of you can answer that for me, please let me know, and we'll start a trial consulting business together. Also, the defense received a crime lab report on that very morning that was produced 7 months prior. I'm sure you've all noticed, and will continue to notice, the lack of procedural courtesy taking place in this trial. Also, I'm sure you're noticing that there are few objections to this repeated behavior, especially by the accused. I personally would be livid to the point of probably getting a new charge. But as we've discussed before, even though Vincent Cosey was accustomed to being at the defendant's table, he was definitely not on the smart and cunning defense attorney side. Of course, neither were his defense attorneys. Anyway, the witness in question, Baker, is a cell tower expert, and the defense wants to strike him as a witness due to the lack of information. Come to find out, the defense and prosecution had a meeting with the cell rep and knew an engineer was going to be assigned to the case. The defense had been provided this information some time ago. It just slipped their mind? Was it due to them having to remember all those cheers? Remember the cheerleader jokes from the earlier episodes? I just thought I'd remind you of what we're dealing with here. Briefcases and pom-poms. Now here's a legitimate concern. The defense is worried that other new documents may show up at any minute. The defense hasn't been able to review any of the documents received the day before the trial or subpoena any witnesses from them. Also, the medical examiner is bringing a mannequin into the courtroom that no one has seen before. I don't know why they're so concerned about that. It's not like the mannequin is going to have an O face or anything. Or will it? I'm not putting anyone beyond anything at this point. Wait, you guys do know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, I don't want to be the podcast pervert. But you know what they say about the shoe fitting. Never mind. Okay, so then the jury is sworn in a day late. Better late than never. Wisconsin professionalism. Available in a random Cracker Jack box near you. The jury swears that they haven't been involved in any conversations about the case, watched anything in the media, or driven by the murder location since they'd left the courtroom the day before. I'm calling bullshit, but whatevs. What was the point of telling the truth? They hadn't been sworn in. We're not going to read a lot of things for you verbatim in this trial, but we will give you the opening arguments just so you can experience them for yourself and not have to trust a mere podcast host for interpreting what they're trying to say. Miss Tank Adams with the prosecution begins.
In the early evening hours of January 14th, 2006, Felicia Jones received a cell phone call from her friend Stephanie Goins. The two agreed to get together for a drink, and approximately 10 minutes later, Stephanie Goins arrived at the apartment complex of Felicia Jones. Stephanie entered the apartment complex and yelled up the stairs to her friend Felicia to see if she was still coming out. Felicia could not leave at that time due to some childcare issues, so Stephanie left. Now, the state will concede at that time Felicia Jones did not see the defendant, Vince Cosey, but Felicia Jones will testify based on other conversations and statements that evening that she had reason to believe that Stephanie Goins was driven around by Vince Cosey, like he had done so many times before. A little while later, Stephanie Goins called Felicia Jones again. Felicia had an opportunity to speak with Stephanie Goins for a longer period of time. Felicia will testify that she was familiar with Vincent Cosey's voice, as she had numerous prior contacts with him. She was readily aware of his voice and could recognize his voice. While on her cell phone with Stephanie Goins, Felicia was able to hear Vincent Cosey's voice in the background, and she could recognize his voice as she heard Vincent say to Stephanie, quote, "Get off the damn phone," close quote. Felicia will testify that Vincent's voice sounded irritated, agitated, and even angry. As Felicia spoke with Stephanie, Felicia heard Stephanie say to Vincent in the car, quote, "You need to let me out of the car. You know that shit you smoke bothers my asthma," close quote. From those statements, Felicia could conclude that Stephanie was in a car and in the car with Vincent Cosey. Felicia also concluded from those statements that Stephanie was referring to Vincent smoking marijuana. And you will hear that Officer Larson located a marijuana cigarette underneath the seat of the driver's car of the blue 1980 Chevy Celebrity that Vincent Cosey had been driving. Now, again, Felicia heard Vincent's voice in the background of the telephone growing more agitated, growing more angry, and again she heard him state, quote, "Get off the damn phone," close quote. While on the phone with Stephanie Goins, Felicia was asked by Stephanie for the number to the police. Felicia provided Stephanie with that telephone number, and the state believes that Felicia will testify after she did that. Felicia figured that Stephanie asked her for the number to the police to use the word police in an effort to get Vincent to stop his behavior. After providing the phone number to the police to Stephanie, Felicia again heard the angry, agitated, louder voice of Vincent Cosey say, quote, "Get off the damn phone," close quote. And then the phone conversation terminating as if someone had hung up the phone before the conversation could be concluded. Felicia tried to call Stephanie back several times, but she wasn't able to reach her. And that would be the last time that Felicia ever spoke with Stephanie Goins. That call ended approximately 8:44.
Wait, the only evidence is this chick thought she heard Cosey's voice on the phone? Damn, Felicia. Have you ever heard of an impression? I call people and sound like Luke Bryan all the time. I know 10-year-olds who can imitate other people's voices. Hell, I know fucking birds that can intimidate other people's voices. There's even one on YouTube that can sing Bodies by Drowning Pool. Not that it has any bearing on this testimony, I just wanted to mention it so you'd all go looking for it. It's borderline amazing. You're going to hear a lot about 4 Mile Road from this point on. There are a ton of these numbered mile roads in the upper Midwest made famous by Eminem in the film 8 Mile, named for 8 Mile Road. Nothing good ever seems to happen on any of these numbered roads, especially the film 8 Mile. Worst movie sex scene ever, in my opinion. Not a huge fan of rap either. Mile roads, bad movie sex, and rap equals a hell no from this podcast host.
His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Mom's spaghetti, he's nervous, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop bombs. But he keeps on forgetting what he wrote down. The whole crowd goes so loud. He opens his mouth, but the words won't come out. He's choking how? Everybody's choking now. The clock's run out. Time's up, over, blah. Come on.
And now, hang on to your hats. Keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times, because it's time for a rider's note from head writer C. Derick Miller.
Most listeners will know that I've traveled the entire country extensively since my departure from law enforcement and becoming a professional rider. In those travels, I took a trip down 8 Mile Road in Detroit. Eminem took a lot of liberties. It's not that bad. I'm sorry if I ruined that movie for you, but honestly, that movie doesn't need any help ruining itself.
Okay, let's continue with Miss Tank Adams.
You'll also hear the testimony of Brian Smith. Brian Smith will testify that a little bit before 9 o'clock, he and his wife, Nicolette Smith, were driving home from some friend's house. He recalls that it was before 9 o'clock because there was some conversation about getting home for a television show, and he recalls specifically that when he got home, he made a point to his wife, "Ha ha, look, I got you here in time." He will testify that he was driving eastbound on 4 Mile Road when he came across a hill. And when he came over the hill, he'll testify that he observed a car in the middle of his lane and that he observed this car kind of pull off onto the side of the road. Now, Brian Smith will testify that he's very familiar with cars due to his work, his business, and he will testify that he observed this car that pulled off onto the side of the road was a blue 1980s Chevy Celebrity because he had owned this type of car before. From his position in the driver's seat, he will advise you that he was able to make several observations. First, he noticed this car had no headlights on. He also noticed that the rear brake lights went on and off as though to signal to the car, Brian Smith's car, "Don't hit me." Brian Smith will testify that when he passed the car, he was able to observe that there was one person in the vehicle because, again, the brake lights were being activated. Brian Smith will tell you that this is a country road. There are no street lamps, so nothing was illuminated that he was able to tell. Brian asked his wife, who is in the passenger seat, should we stop? His wife, Nicolette Smith, was tired. They had been out with friends. She just wanted to get home. There was this television program, so she said no. But she will testify that she also observed this car, and again, she'll tell you because there was no lamp, she couldn't tell exactly the age, sex, or race of the car's occupants, but while she's in the passenger seat as she's driving past the vehicle next to her, she was able to observe 2 people in the vehicle. You will also hear testimony from Bradley Ridholm. He will testify that shortly before 9 o'clock, he was also driving eastbound on 4 Mile Road when he observed a body in the ditch. After making his observations, he went up to Nicholson Road, made a U-turn, came around back to the area where he observed the body in the ditch and pulled into the driveway of the home. He got out, knocked on the door, fearing that it was possibly the owner of the home. Right there, he waited for a minute or two. When he got no response, he picked up his cell phone and called 911 and started walking over to the body. He'll tell you that it was January. It was cold out, it was nighttime, and as he approached the body, he didn't observe any breath coming from the person lying in the ditch. As he approached the person, he observed her face to be down in the gravel and the soil in the ditch. He didn't touch her, but he was able to observe on her back what he believed to be a bullet hole, and then he heard squads responding. At approximately 9:12, Sergeant Stouse arrived and approached the body lying face down in the ditch. Sergeant Stouse will testify that when he approached the body, the person, Stephanie Goins, was still warm, indicating that her death had been recent. You'll hear testimony from investigators that they took a temperature of the outside air conditions and found it to be approximately 30 degrees. You'll also hear testimony that officers determined Stephanie Goins was shot numerous times. You'll also hear testimony from officers that the location of Stephanie was 0.5 of a mile from Vincent Casey's grandparents' house. The autopsy performed by Dr. Linda Bidzicki of the Waukesha County Medical Examiner's Office will show that Stephanie Goins sustained numerous gunshots. She suffered a gunshot wound to the top of her head, to the back of her head, another gunshot wound to the back of her head, a gunshot wound to the back of her right shoulder, a gunshot wound to the left side of her back, a gunshot wound to her hand, and abrasions about her head and face. You'll hear testimony that a number of slugs were taken from Stephanie Goins' body, and Reg Templin of the State Crime Lab will testify that based on his professional opinion, all of the bullets were fired from the same gun. In the early morning hours of January 15, 2006, officers began contacting a number of Vincent Casey's family members to see if any of them had seen from him or heard from him. Now, these family members, well, Vincent Cosey, but listen to the statements that they made to police just hours after Stephanie Goins was found dead. You'll hear testimony that Vincent Cosey made a number of statements to his sister, Titania Cosey. You will hear that Vincent Cosey was emotional and upset. Vincent told his sister he was going to shoot himself. You're going to hear that Titania Cosey told a Racine police officer, Officer Stewart, that Vincent told her that he was, quote, waving the gun and it went off, close quote. Titania also told Officer Stewart, quote, she's dead and he can't go to jail, close quote. Titania further advised Officer Stewart that her brother was distraught, and she stated, quote, now their family is suffering, and so will ours, close quote. Titania went on to tell Officer Stewart, quote, he didn't have to do it out by my grandmother's house and stress her out, close quote. Again, you'll hear testimony that Vincent Cosey's grandparents' house was 0.5 of a mile where Stephanie Goins' body was recovered. You'll also hear testimony that Titania Cosey, Vincent's sister, talked to police officers from the Caledonia Police Department. You'll hear that Titania stated to the Caledonia Police that Vincent admitted to killing his girlfriend, but that it was an accident. You'll further hear that Titania revealed to the Caledonia officers Vincent stated that as Stephanie exited the vehicle, he accidentally killed her. Titania Cosey, Vincent's sister, provided a written statement that's in her own handwriting and signed by her, which in part states that Vincent was sorry and that it was an accident. Officers also had the opportunity to speak with Sonia Blake, Vincent Casey's mother. She too loves her son very much. At the time of this incident, hours after it happened, when Ms. Sonia Blake spoke to officers about her son, she told Lieutenant Stannis that Vincent was sorry for what he did, and that she already knew Vincent had taken the life of Stephanie, and that Vincent commented he was going to kill himself. Officers also spoke with a brother of Vincent Cosey, Ernest Cosey. When Ernest spoke to officers, he said, quote, man, I can't say nothing to him. He wants to kill himself. What can I do? Close quote. Ernest told officers that Vincent said, quote, he don't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Close quote. Joyce Ward, a friend of Vincent's, will indicate around 9 o'clock she received a phone call from Vincent. She didn't know why he was calling, but he told her to meet him on Rowe Avenue. Joyce proceeded to that location, and she indicates that where West 6th Street intersects with Rupert Avenue, she passed Vincent Cosey, and that when she passed him, he was in the blue mid-1980s Chevy vehicle, and that he was alone in the vehicle. Vince never showed up on Rowe Avenue. Joyce Ward called him back on her cell phone to see where he was. He said he'd talk to her later, so she went home to eat. When Joyce Ward got home, she received information from a friend where she learned that a young girl named Stephanie was dead and that Vincent Cosey was the one who killed her. Upon hearing this information, Joyce Ward got emotional, got upset, and decided to shower and dress and leave her apartment. She will testify that she went to Viper's Lounge, a bar, and that she got there prior to 11 o'clock because she didn't have to pay the cover charge. She stayed there until about close, and then she went home to some friend's house for the early morning hours, and that she didn't go back home. Approximately 7 o'clock in the morning, Joyce Ward got a telephone call from Vince Cosey. Ms. Ward indicated that she asked Vincent if he did it. She said that Vincent didn't deny killing Stephanie, and he didn't object to the question that she asked him. Instead, he just clammed up, didn't say anything. His attitude was mellow, monotone. Now, Felicia Jones, again still searching for her friend who had called the police to report she believed that possibly Vincent had kidnapped Stephanie Goins, went with officers to his house at 1524 Maple Street. There, officers located his mid-1980s blue vehicle, and under the seat they found the marijuana cigarette. They also located a blue van that Vincent Cosey drives, and in the van there's a seat that folds down like a bench seat. and on the seat were 2 bullets, and those bullets were consistent with the bullet that was found at the scene in the ditch by Stephanie Gaines' body. The state will not be able to present the cell phone of Stephanie Goins. It was never recovered. The state will not be able to present the cell phone records, the cell phone of Vincent Cosey. It too is gone. The gun was never recovered. The state will also not be able to provide an eyewitness to the shooting, but the state believes that there is enough circumstantial evidence that points directly to Vincent Cosey as the shooter and the person that caused the death of Stephanie Goins.
All right, there you have it. The prosecution's opening statement. Are you convinced? I didn't think so. Well, let's see what the defense has up their sleeve. Here we go.
Good morning. My name is Reina Morales, and I know that I was introduced to you yesterday through Ms. Deborah Patterson. I'm sorry, I have a sore throat. First of all, it is the state's burden to prove this case to you. It is their burden to bring enough evidence to show you how it is that they have decided to charge my client. My client who turned himself in to the police department on the morning of January 15th. What we know, and Ms. Tank Adams has given you some of that information, is that on January 14th, Brian Smith will tell you that he did see a vehicle. The vehicle was parked on the side of the road on 4 Mile Road before it reaches Nicholson Road. He was heading in that direction because he was going to go home. His wife was with him, and she wanted to make sure that they got home before 9 o'clock because they had a show to watch, okay? They don't live that far away from there. Apparently, they made it home just in the nick of time because she even remembers making a comment to him that they just made it. Apparently, through police reports, we do see that Nicolette Smith tells him that she believes that she saw 2 individuals in the vehicle. No race, no identifiable information, no shadows as to how heavy, how slim, no real description is given of any of the individuals in that vehicle. Shortly after 9 p.m., Bradley Rydholm notices a body in the ditch. The first thing that he does is to go over to Nicholson, which is right around there, turn around and parks and goes immediately to the body, touches the body, notices the body is still warm, and immediately calls 911. While he's waiting for the police get there. Sergeant Stouse is the first one to respond. They received the dispatch at 9:12, which means the call to the police department was placed before 9:12 by Mr. Bradley Rydholm. He is already at the scene at 9:16. They go, they secure the area. That area is blocked off. Part of the investigation is going to be that Sergeant Stouse waits there, and he will testify. He will tell you that he got there so quickly that the paramedics hadn't even arrived. He stepped aside, and then the paramedics went in there and tried to do everything that they could, for this lady who's there on the side of the road. They didn't try for too long. It was obvious that they really couldn't do much for her. Mr. Rydholm is going to tell you that he did touch her. She was warm. Sergeant Stouse went and touched her. She was warm. Winter, January 14th. Cold. Linda Nelson is the individual that lives around there who had to deal with having this happen in front of her residence. She spoke with Sergeant Stouse and tells him, "We know we got home around 8 o'clock. My husband was watching a game. We heard the door knocking. Someone is at the door. She goes, she answers. She sees a vehicle out there. She eventually figures out that the vehicle that's out there parked is the vehicle of Bradley Rydholm, who is also the individual that came over to the residence to kind of let them know what's going on." So the police do talk to her. They don't hear anything. I know that a lot of you indicated that you are familiar with guns. From my experience with guns, my very limited experience is that they're loud. However, she can't prove any information as to whether or not she heard any guns going off outside her residence. What we know here is that there are 2 different police departments involved, and the reason the police departments are involved is after rescue gets done with Ms. Goins, the reason she is identified is that Sergeant Stouse notices her purse is there. He goes through her purse, and thankfully enough, he is able to find a picture ID. She did not have a driver's license, and he is able to determine from the ID, he's able to recognize that the picture on the ID looks similar to the person who's laying on the road. He also gets an address. The address is on Meade Street in Racine, so he immediately starts contacting the different authorities to make sure that things are done properly. He contacts the medical examiner because they need to get to the scene and be able to remove the body from the scene. He also contacts the Racine Police Department and has contact initially with the person who is on duty, and that person, I think it is the shift commander, Pablo Guardiola, at that time. And he said, "You have our full cooperation." This is an individual who is in the city of Racine. We really don't have a lot of details. We really don't know if this happened here. We don't know if the body was found here. We don't know much about it. And they said, "You have our full cooperation." One of the things, unfortunately, that the investigator who's assigned to this, which is Investigator Warmington with Officer Diener, what they have to do is they have to go talk to the family of this individual. But first, they really didn't know what they were going to do, so they get back up. There are different police officers that joined them before they actually go to the residence. They try to knock. No one really comes out, to meet them, so eventually they just open up the door, and apparently the door was unlocked. They come in contact with the mother of Ms. Goins. When they talk to her, and they give her the news. It takes her a little bit to collect herself, and then she gives them information as to where she thought her daughter would be that evening, okay? And the phone trees begin right there at that moment. We know from police records that they were able to have contact, or they were at the residence shortly after 10 o'clock. Stephanie's mom says, "You know what? I know that she was going to be going out with Katrina Davis, who was one of the friends of Stephanie, and Felicia Jones will also give you that information. That was one of the things that they were going to do, and that they were going to meet up later on. They had had a stressful week. They were going to relax, have a drink." Investigator Diener told us later, and a little flurry of web context starts there. Katrina Davis then calls Felicia Jones and lets her know that at this point it's really unclear as to how much they know. They just know that she's missing and that they need to find her. That's the information that the police officer gives them. Felicia Jones, after receiving this information from Katrina Davis, who was contacted by Officer Diener, who wanted to know how they could tie everything together, then contacts the police department. She calls and speaks with Officer Pavlonis. I'm sure he's got a title. And tells him, "I know who's got her," because at this point, they don't know anything. And she says, "I really don't know his name. I know where he stays. He stays somewhere on Maple." Gives a description of the house, location of the house. The police departments, both police departments are involved. He punches this information in the computer, looks at it, and then starts saying, the house list to Sonia Blake. And then Steve starts giving her the names through the phone of the people who live at that residence. He said, "Could it be Ernest Cosey?" She said, "No, I don't know him." Then Vincent Cosey. And she goes, "Yes, Vinnie, that's it." Okay, she didn't have the name of the individual until after she speaks to Officer Pavlonis, and he punches the information in the computer and is able to give it to her that way. Diener and Warmington go pick her up. They question her further. One of the things they have to do is just verify, in fact, it is the house they are talking about, so they take her to the scene, and they do verify, yes, that is the house that I was describing. That is the house that I know that he lives at. She has been, in the community for a while. She will testify that she knew that they had dated on and off for about 3 years, had seen him, viewed him, maybe didn't sit with him at dinner with him, but knew him and saw him and knew who he was. She was able to point out the house to the officers. Immediately, a perimeter is established by the Racine Police Department. And when you look at the police reports, there's so many officers involved. When you talk to Sonia Blake, there is like a vehicle here, a vehicle in front of the house, a vehicle in the corner, a vehicle around the block. Officers, probably before 11 o'clock, they're surrounding the Cosey residence. And they receive an order. Anyone who is coming or going from that residence is going to be stopped, is going to be questioned. We are trying to locate this person. This is a person of interest. They know they're going to go in. It's going to be a no-knock warrant, which means the SWAT team has to get ready. It's a pretty scary situation. They go in, they have a shield, they're ready. They're not going to say, hello, police, can we talk to you? Can you come out here? We have some questions for you. No, it is a no-knock warrant authorized based on the information that Felicia Jones conveyed. And before 7 o'clock a.m., after they've staked out the house the whole night, they go. And they do the search warrant. Before doing the search warrant, though, this is the way the family is treated. They call the residents and say, we want everybody who is in there to come out, and they do. They file along, and they're not really allowed to just sit on the side of the road. They're put in the paddy wagon, which is the transportation wagon for somebody who has been arrested. Locked in there, can't really get out unless somebody opens the door for you. So my client's family is put in there until they're able to clear and secure the residence. Eventually they are allowed to come back in, and they go in there and, they're pretty stressed as to the accusations. What's going on? And their home is just devastated. It's not a process that takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes or maybe half an hour. They were searching that residence for close to 3 hours, probably. If you look at the information, at least 3 hours, just going through everything, trying to find anything and everything of evidentiary value that they could find, to try to link my client to this. So we see what happens once the name Cosey comes up. We see how the family is treated. And the officers will testify, hey, a body has been found. We will do anything and everything to be able to tie it, to solve it, to bring some closure here. And they did. They did try. They tried very hard as they did. Again, listen. I want you to sift through all the information that is presented to you. And I think there have been some concessions. And at the end, when you listen to everything, you will know my client's only reasonable actions that morning was to turn himself in. He was not arrested. His family, they were worried. They were worried. You can come to your own conclusions. They were worried that something might happen to him. After having the SWAT team break into your house, they were worried that something serious would happen to him through the officers, and that's why he took the decision of turning himself in. When he turns himself in, he's got money in his pocket. He's got other items in his pocket. It is not like he really thought too much about it. And he said to his mom was with him, Ernest Cosey, his brother, was with him, walking him to the police department to make sure for safekeeping that nothing happens to him. They prefer if this happens rather than the manhunt to continue. And just the items that were with him, the state, the officers we don't know if they ever had any other information. We know that they, through their resources and everything here, and at the end what you will have, but they will not be able to give you this. They don't have a gun. You don't have any eyewitnesses who actually saw them together that night. You don't have any eyewitnesses that placed my client in that area. You don't have any police reports that indicate that in the vehicle, actually, we have a police report that indicates in the vehicle there is no blood splatter evidence from the crime lab. There is evidence from the crime lab that there's no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that links my client to Ms. Goins having passed away. I want you to listen with a clear mind. I want you to understand that as he sits here, it is their burden to prove that he did this. And again, they won't be able to even match the soil evidence that they recovered from his vehicle. As soon as they stake the house, the vehicle is there. They take possession of the vehicle shortly after 10 o'clock. They take the brake pedal off. They send that to Quantico, to the FBI lab, and they do soil sample analysis. Nothing was a match. Listen with a fair mind. Listen to what is missing. That is all we're asking. And if you do that, you will know that the state cannot establish that my client is guilty of what he has been accused of. That is all we're asking. Thank you.
Well, that's it. The prosecution and defense give you their theory of the case. It's a pretty simple case when you boil it down. The state of Wisconsin believes this black man sitting in the defendant's chair killed Stephanie Goins, and they're going to prove it to you using theory, innuendo, and hearsay. Oh, and the ear witness. Let's see how that goes. Oh, wait, I do want to point out one thing. Did you notice that the state said that Vinnie's mom said she knew that her son had done it, and Vinnie had admitted it to her, and that he was going to take his own life? Well, I called Vinnie's mom. Let's see what she had to say.
Okay, well, let me ask you about the statements that the police said you said. Their version of, I guess, their interaction with you was that you said that Vinnie told you that he accidentally shot Stephanie and he didn't want to go to jail for the rest of his life and he didn't want to turn him in and he was going to kill himself and all this stuff. Did any of that ever happen?
No.
So he never told you that? That's the first part
No.
of it. Okay, and then the second part is you never told the police that he said that.
Right.
Do you think that they did this on purpose, like they were just kind of trying to make stuff up to make Vinnie look guilty, or do you think maybe they misinterpreted what you were saying, or what do you think they did?
I think they were trying to say it because, they didn't they always claimed they liked it, my grandparents and my parents and stuff out there in Franceville. But the police chief out there in Franceville he wasn't no good. Caledonia, whatever it was.
Uh-oh. Looks like we have what we call in the industry a plot twist. Great. Now I have to investigate the police chief. Maybe not. We'll leave that for later. All right, so I want to highlight a couple things about what Miss Morales just told us. In the search for Vinnie, the Cosey homes are being surrounded, monitored, and searched by several police officers.
That was my brother who called me, who lived out in Franceville, because my mom had a place out in Franceville they had checked first. And then they just started coming around, circling the house. And they just came in.
So they came into your house?
Yeah, they came in.
And they're looking for Vinnie?
Yeah, they were looking for him, but I told them I haven't seen him.
Yeah, and at that point they were just looking for him, right? They weren't like doing an investigation and looking for evidence or anything like that. They were just like, hey, we want to talk to him.
They came and searched my whole house.
Yeah. Did you give them permission to search, or they just busted in?
They just said they were coming in to search it.
Huh, okay.
I don't know. They just marched in and checked the whole house.
So so let me ask, you guys had dealings with the police before. Is this something where, they were coming around kind of harassing you guys on a regular basis, or were you kind of like, you don't talk to us and we won't talk to you? Like, what was that kind of relationship with the police department like before all this happened?
Well, see, I live on Maple Street, and before they used to have gangs and shootings and stuff around here, and they put a camera right in front of my house on a pole, and whatever go on, they could look right up in my house.
Would you describe then as this kind of a rough neighborhood?
It was, but not no more.
Oh, okay. So it was back then, but it's better now.
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay.
Since Felicia Jones claims she heard Vincent Cosey's voice on the phone, the police feel as if that's enough information to have a no-knock warrant. We've discussed this already. Birds can do impressions, and I personally feel this means absolutely dick. Then the defense states the police called the home asking everyone to come outside. They comply, and the defense claims they are all seated in a paddy wagon. A fucking paddy wagon? Seriously?
Paddy is a 19th century slur against the Irish, and I take offense. I can't believe this is common speech in a courtroom, even if it is the year 2006. It really wasn't all that long ago.
The family is detained for 3 hours while the home is searched for evidence. The defense claims this is due to recognition with the Cosey last name. Remember, this is a small community with very few black families. The Cosey's criminal histories revealed to us earlier in the court transcripts that most of them have had a run-in with the law at one time or another. Would you consider this to be criminal profiling? I'm just curious. Vincent and his family believe turning himself in is the best option to keep the local police from doing something stupid during the manhunt. So, he does. Here's Vinnie talking about why he did that.
Like, and one of my big things is too low. Like, if I did anything, though, at the time, though, if I was guilty of something like that, though, I would have never came to turn myself in for no reason. You know what I'm saying? I came to turn myself in, which they had access to where the camera was. They had a surveillance camera on the block where my mother stayed. So they had a chance to see that I had the same clothes on that night and that same morning, which when I turned myself in. So it was nothing I was trying to hide. I had no kind of gun. I had no DNA, no nothing on me, no kind of anything to connect me to anything with nothing with a gun. So I came and gave myself up to them because I didn't want to run. I didn't want to put nobody else back in no danger. If I did have to, get into anything with the police, I didn't want nobody else to get hurt, nothing to happen. So that's why I came and turned myself in. I had no reason to run from them. So that was the reason why I did come and turn myself in back to them anyway. There was no reason for me to hide, but I had so many people calling me. If you look at my phone bill, I had 1 million calls that night from the time I went and turned myself in.
But so you knew that they were looking for you, like
yeah,
it was
I knew they was looking for me because I had got to getting different calls. The police was over here. You think what happened? Do you think they looking for him? What happened? So automatically, I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
The defense asked the jury to listen for the missing evidence and that the state cannot prove Cosey's involvement. Spoiler alert, they don't. As American Justice Podcast history has shown, they rarely do. I can even promise you they won't in future seasons as well. It's just what juries do, or don't do. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Humanity as a whole just seems to like to take joy in the misfortune of others. Check out pretty much any YouTube clip out there. They're full of misfortunes. Just like life. Life in prison. Life in prison is unfortunate. All right, so let's begin with the actual trial itself. Felicia Jones takes the stand. The judge instructs her that if she's asked about being convicted of a crime, she needs to answer truthfully with yes and how many times. If she lies, they can dig through her criminal background. She's been convicted of theft before. On a side note, the witness, Brian Smith, had been convicted of sexual intercourse with a child, which in the state of Wisconsin is only a Class A misdemeanor. Oh, geez. I know you can't see me right now, but trust me, I'm shaking my head. The prosecution claims that this charge shouldn't affect his truthful character because it happened 10 years ago. The defense, of course, disagrees. All right, next, the judge claims the jury is already getting territorial with their seats, and that usually only occurs a few days into trial. They're freaking ready. Butt imprints in the seats and all. They would probably all scream guilty in unison at this early point in the trial, but they unfortunately had to wait until everybody was finished talking. Mr. Repeshak begins questioning Felicia. She claimed to be Stephanie Goins' friend for over a decade. She claimed to speak with Stephanie at 7:51 p.m. on the night of the murder. Vincent was going to pick both of them up and then drop them off at Felicia's mother's house.
And now, hang on to your hats. Keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times, because it's time for a rider's note. From head writer C. Derick Miller.
I'm glad I stopped bringing my friends to hang out at my mama's house when I was a teenager. I just feel that's part of growing up unless you just feel like there's nothing else to do or nowhere else to go. Oh, Wisconsin. Right? Never mind. Carry on.
Stephanie came over to Felicia's house after that 7:51 call, but Felicia said she couldn't go with her because her baby's father was, quote, holding her at the house. I'm not a big fan of that terminology. Maybe this guy needs to be investigated too. That was at 8:15 p.m., and Felicia called Stephanie at 8:30 p.m., some 15 minutes later. They talked for 15 minutes, and Felicia claimed to hear Vincent Cosey's voice in the background. Keep these times in the back of your mind because the times that she talked to Felicia is going to come up into question very importantly later on. She claimed Cosey repeatedly told Stephanie to get off the phone, and he sounded irritated. He got louder and louder each time. Felicia claimed Stephanie asked for the police's phone number before hanging up. If everything occurring in this car is really all that violent, shouldn't the police's phone number be 911? Isn't that what they've drilled into our heads since the day one when you encounter a dangerous or potentially dangerous situation? She would rather say that she thought Stephanie was asking for the police phone number so that whoever was in the car would see that she was getting the police department's number. But if it's me, I'm just straight up saying, hey, if you keep doing this shit, I'm calling the police. But maybe that's just me. Let's hear what Vinnie has to say about how well Felicia really knew him.
crazy. It's the same thing when I went, like, I think I told you a little bit about our first season. You know, it's the same thing. You look through the appeal and you sit there and you think to yourself, well, where's the proof that he did this? You know, it's like, yeah, there's circumstantial evidence that, you know, people could be lying or whatever, but where's the proof? And there's no proof. And so it's just...
And that was the whole thing. They was going off of he said, she said, whatever. Because basically, Felicia just made up her whole conversation saying she heard me in the background of conversation of a phone and all this, but she never seen nothing, heard nothing, and all this. She just basically said she can identify me from being on the phone, which I never even hanged around her or talked to her. So she don't even know me from Joe Blow. And she was one of my little sister friends. That's the only way she knew where my mom stayed at, because, you know what I'm saying, she was my little sister friend, which me and my little sister had two different moms, you know what I'm saying? But that was one of my sister friends, and that was the only reason how she knew where I stayed at that time, which that was just my mailing address anyway over there at my mom's house anyway. I stayed with Joyce over there way away from there anyway. I stayed over on the north side area anyway. I didn't even stay there. That was just my mailing address so long that I never even had changed it.
All right, so Felicia claims Stephanie was telling Cosey to let her out of the car and to stop smoking, quote, that stuff because she had asthma. All right, now comes the interesting stuff. Felicia claimed to have been around Vincent Cosey around 8 times in her entire life. Wait, then it jumps to 20 times with only a single question in between her answers. Here, let me give you the exact quote. It's kind of interesting on how it happens. Mr. Repeshek, during the course of, say, your lifetime, how many times have you had contact with the defendant, seen him, talked to him, or been around him? Felicia Jones, about 8 times. Mr. Repeshek, and during those 8 times, did you have occasion to hear his voice? Felicia Jones, yes. Mr. Repeshek, and was the voice that you heard prior to January 14th coming from Mr. Cosey the same voice that you heard in the background when you were talking to Stephanie Goins? Felicia Jones, can you go back to the question due to how many times I heard his voice? How long have I known him? Mr. Repeshek, well, how long have you known him? Felicia Jones, as long as she's known him. Mr. Repeshek, all right, and does that change your answer of 8 times? Felicia Jones, yes. Mr. Repeshek, how many times have you had contact with him? Felicia Jones, about 20. What's interesting about it is that the police report taken at the time of this incident, she actually told the police that she had never met Vinnie. Just crazy. All right, here's Nick from the True Crime Garage and I talking about this particular point. Enjoy.
This Felicia Jones that was the ear witness, you know, one of the other things that she also testified to is, you know, she said that that Stephanie was saying, you know, to stop smoking that crap, you know, about my asthma, you know, to stop the car, all this stuff. But she did not hear any kind of physical struggle. She didn't hear any kind of violent talking or violent argument or anything like that. It was just, you know, she was frustrated and she was just trying to basically, but that was one of the things that the prosecution brought up, that it's just one of those things that you just look at it and it just doesn't hold water. It doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, it doesn't make sense. And then let's kind of rehash this a bit, because we have the ear witness who has changed her story twice, possibly 3 times.
Right.
And maybe, look, nobody has a perfect memory. We just don't. I was struggling yesterday to recall what I did last Sunday. In fact, I had to ask somebody, did this happen on Sunday? And they confirmed, yes, it did. So nobody has a perfect memory. And I'm not trying to attack Miss Jones too much here, but What we do have is a situation where we can say, all right, well, the story has changed twice, maybe 3 times on a detail that is actually, look, if you told me, hey, I don't know if I met the guy 5 times or maybe it was 10 times, that's a lot different than saying I never met him, but I met him 20 times. That's a big difference. So we have that situation. And then we have the problem here is we don't have Vinnie. Vinnie's story is I wasn't with her. So he doesn't know what conversation was going on between Stephanie and Felicia. Unfortunately, and I wish to God this were different, Stephanie's not here to tell us what that conversation was on the cell phone. We only have Felicia to tell us what that conversation was. And should we question it? I think it's fair. I think it's fair.
Yeah, and she was definitely, if you you can see that she is not a very credible or reliable witness. In fact, it's hard for me to even understand how the jury put any kind of weight into her testimony at all. She changes her story several times about several different things. So I would actually, if we had longer and more resources, I would love to go try to track down some of these jurors and be like, what were you thinking? What exactly did you put in, what gave you enough that you could come to the conclusion that, yeah, this guy is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
So now Felicia is claiming that Vinnie had held Stephanie hostage before. If this was truthfully a, quote, hostage situation, wouldn't there be a police report to coincide with this incident? Perhaps hostage is a strong word. Also, didn't Felicia just say that her boyfriend was, quote, holding her at the apartment? Wouldn't that be considered kidnapping? Wouldn't that be a hostage situation? Maybe Felicia Jones just uses the word hostage as he doesn't want her to go anywhere. It's all about semantics, right? Sometimes we don't use the same words that we mean to. Or sometimes we say words that don't mean what we think they mean. Nobody has any idea how long Felicia Jones has been in school. Maybe she only graduated the 5th grade. Or maybe she has a PhD. Who knows? Anyway, perhaps the defense should object here, but who the hell am I to do their jobs for them? Oh, hey, speaking of the defense, it's Miss Morales' turn to cross-examine the witness. Felicia had claimed to know Vinnie for as long as she'd known Stephanie, which was 13 years, yet she didn't know Vinnie's full name. She only knew him as Vinnie. The police had to give her his last name. She'd only truthfully known him for about 6 months. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the AJ Army, I want you to listen to something real close here. This is going to blow your mind. Well, at least I hope it does. I realize at this point in our super sleuth career, nothing seems to blow our minds anymore, but this is big. How do you think Felicia picked Vinnie out of a picture lineup? Remember, we're honestly trying to figure out at this point how well Felicia actually knew Vinnie. At first, she said it was 13 years. Then we find out it was really only about 6 months. Then she says that she met him 8 times. And then one question later, she's met him 20 times. So we really want to get to the bottom of how well does she know him? How many times had she actually met him? Had she actually heard his voice? How many times has she heard his voice? Has she even ever talked to him in her entire life? We don't know. So the police had her pick him out of a 6-picture lineup. Did they have 6 black guys and she just happened to pick the right one? Or even worse, did they have 5 white guys and Vinnie just happened to be the only black guy? No. They put his goddamn name below his picture. What in the literal fuck? Listen to her testimony. Ms. Morales is asking her how she knew Vinnie's last name. All right, here we go. Ms. Morales: they actually gave you that name, right? Felicia Jones: no, I pointed out his picture. The picture had his name under it. Oh my God. I really wish you guys could see me shaking my head sometimes. All right, so suddenly Felicia is no longer sure of anything. How many officers she's talked to, how many reports she's read, nothing has a straight answer. In fact, after reading one of the reports, she claims that the report itself contained inaccurate information. Felicia goes on to say that she never personally saw Vincent with her own eyes that day, but knew Stephanie was hanging out with another male friend. She claimed that Stephanie had two other male friends by the name of Quan and Scotty. No, not me, a different Scotty. Were Quan and Scotty ever questioned regarding Stephanie's fate? Well, I hate to break it to you, but no, they were not. The police had their suspect and intended on twisting the facts and evidence to support their arrest. Sound familiar? Less work, slam dunk, they all get to go home, right? All right, so the prosecution and defense are both done with Miss Jones at this point. I'm not really sure who she helped. Oh well. Here's me and Nick from the True Crime Garage talking about Ms. Jones.
Back to the ear witness, she admittedly didn't know who Vincent Cosey was. And I believe that she's referring to him as Stephanie's boyfriend, which I don't know the full disclosure. I don't know the exact relationship that the two of them had. They could have just been dating. They could have been friends. It sounds to me like, for the most part, they had some type of romantic relationship going on.
Well, they were on again and off again.
Yeah.
But and this is another thing that was brought up at trial by these by most of these 18 witnesses, is Stephanie had a lot of boyfriends.
And that's what I was going to point out, because we know that from, and there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, we all should be so lucky to have a bunch of boyfriends or a bunch of girlfriends, right?
Right.
Look, at the end of the day, Stephanie was a bright young woman, a beautiful young woman, and she is the victim here. We're trying to determine if Vincent's a victim here as well. And so when we have the ear witness, well, how do they make that connection? How do they draw a straight line from, oh, I heard a guy in the background on the phone, to it was this guy? Well, law enforcement, they bring some pictures of and some names with them of people, of men that they knew that were friends or close with Stephanie. And they present them to this friend of hers. And she goes, oh, well, it was that one.
Well,
how great of a witness does that make?
Well, I do want to point out, though, that that she changed her story
correct
in trial. When she talked to the detectives that night, and she was the one that actually pointed the police towards Vincent,
right,
and was like, you need to look at this, when I talked to his mom, she basically said, yeah, the police know us and they don't like the Coseys. And so apparently, and she was like fourth or fifth generation. So the Coseys have been around this town, Caledonia, for a long time. They're generational there. So people know who they are. And but this friend Felicia Jones, she changes her story in trial and says, yeah, I've met him about 8 times. And it, to me, it's kind of funny, because if I've met somebody, let's say I have met them exactly 8 times, I'm not going to remember that. I'm going to say, I don't know, 5 or 10 times, something like that. But for somebody to come out and say, oh, I've met him exactly 8 times, and then she turns around after the prosecution kind of questions her on it and calls her on the mat about how many times she says, oh yeah, I've met him actually 20 times. And it's like, well, wait a second, what? Well, first of all, you said you never met him in the police reports. And then now all of a sudden at trial, you're saying you've met him 8 times. And then all of a sudden you say you've met him 20 times. And then she goes back and, she kind of, the defense cross-examines her and she kind of hem-haws about it. She doesn't really know how many times she's met him. It could be a couple times. So yeah, this whole how did you recognize Vincent's voice from only meeting him? Let's just, worst case scenario, let's just say you have met him a few times. How do you recognize his voice across from someone else that may be the same physical stature? And when I meet somebody, I can't even remember their face for the first probably 3 or 4 times that I meet them, let alone their voice. And and I've even had, and I bring this up in the episode, I've even had several times where I'll have a friend that I've known for 6 months or a year or whatever, and they'll call and leave a voicemail and they say, "Hey, it's me, call me back." And I think to myself, well, wait a second, who was that? I don't even recognize that person. Plus, not to mention, almost 100% of the time, someone's voice is going to sound different on the phone than it is in person.
Okay, so Kevin Tighe takes the stand. He's Vincent's nephew. He doesn't recall giving any officers information regarding which vehicle his uncle was driving on the night in question, but the prosecution is hell-bent on insinuation that he did. As his testimony continues, he remembers nothing, saw nothing, and it was just a typical day. A typical day in good old Racine County where everyone knows everyone and one of those people gets shot and killed. Just a typical day when your own home is being invaded by armed SWAT officers with a no-knock warrant. Translation: I don't want to live here, and neither should any of our listeners. He talked to the police, and they asked him where Vincent was. He doesn't remember how many cops or how many cars or anything being discussed. At some point, he sat in the paddy wagon as well. I still can't believe that they're using this term in the year 2006 so repeatedly and freely. Finally, they excuse him because he just didn't know anything. Next up, Brian Smith. Let's all hope that he knows something. Oh good, he's worked at an auto parts store for 15 years and has owned several cars, granting him the ability to differentiate between different types and kinds of cars in total darkness while driving by them at 60 miles an hour. The superhero witness has arrived. He only knew of at least one person to be in the car because someone had to hit the brakes, signaling him not to hit the motionless car in the road. As he passed, it appeared as though the car was attempting to get further off the road. The defense begins the cross-examination. His knowledge of Chevy celebrities is questioned, of course. He claimed he was going too fast to see anyone at all in the vehicle. We'll have to ask his wife here in a minute, but Mr. Smith says he saw officers at the same spot on 4 Mile Road the next morning and stopped because of what he had seen the night before. They show him his report from the next day to refresh his memory. After all, it had been a whole 6 months. He said his wife had been complaining about watching a television show all day, so he was trying his best to get her home by 9 o'clock. He got there at 5 till. He bragged about this. Contrary to popular belief, having a television-obsessed, nagging wife negates your bragging rights, pal. He admitted to speeding on a dark road late at night so his wife could watch a television show. Who is the real potential killer here? I wanted to ask Vincent about this witness and his expertness in cars. And here's what Vinnie had to say. Wait, is expertness a word? Hey, it is. Cool. I thought I was just being a smart aleck. Turns out I am smart. Anyway, here's Vinnie.
I want to ask you about the car that the guy that was driving by that was trying to get to home so his wife could watch her TV show. He said that he saw a car that was like yours. I guess the celebrity.
He said familiar to the car. That's what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, but he also said that it had some I guess front end damage that in the same place that yours did. Like, kind of just walk me through what's the whole story with that guy and what was the real story? What was he saying?
I don't know what was going on with him. Whatever they say, he came up to the scene the next day. And that's where they got the information for him from, they said. But also, this same kind of car, I had got pulled over a couple months ago. Some guy got killed in Racine on a different street, and they had me at gunpoint and said my car was involved in the crime. But then when they got the car, they took me out of the car, me and my friend, at gunpoint. Then they said it wasn't the right car. You know what I'm saying? And that car was a Buick Century or something like that. And all them cars look alike. The Buick Century, the Delta 988 Oldsmobile, the 9880 Oldsmobile, all of them looked alike. All of them was the same kind of body style car.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, he said, wasn't there a deal where there was some front end damage, like on the headlight or the fender or something, that he said was
no front end damage. There was no front end damage on the car at all. That's what I'm saying. So I had a little crack up on the top of the hood thing. That was it. That was from where I had put a radio in, and the wire had busted a little piece of the thing right there. That was it. There was no front end damage to the car, and they had all the pictures of the car too. So
yeah, and didn't he say that there was front end damage, or am I just confusing that with something else?
I seen that in the report too. He said something like it was front end damage or whatever to the car or whatever, but he couldn't give him no type of license plate number, no nothing. And his wife was in the passenger seat, and she couldn't even identify the car. How he driving at 60-some miles per hour, and he can give more description than she can.
The next witness? No one is even sure if she'd been charged with a crime before. Did they not check these people out? Or are they just given that everyone in Racine County, Wisconsin has been charged with at least one crime in their lives? But Brian's wife, Nicolette Smith, takes a stand. She claims that they almost rear-ended the car in question and almost got into an accident. Is Brian downplaying the encounter, or is she just exaggerating? Her husband wanted to stop and help, but she said no. It was dark, and after all, she had to get home to watch her TV show. If this is indeed Stephanie Goins' last moments in life, Brian and Nicolette Smith could have possibly saved her. Nope, TV show. Gotta get home. Don't want to miss Law & Order SVU. Miss Smith even claims to have made some gestures toward the occupants of the vehicle for being in the road. Again, if you're Stephanie Goins and this is your last moment on Earth, how much would it suck to get the middle finger from the only passerby who could have potentially saved your life? And because she's on her way home to do nothing but watch her favorite television show. Racine County, Wisconsin is not the future destination I once hoped it would be. Stay away at all costs, ladies and gentlemen. Stay away. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this episode and day one of the trial. I appreciate you sticking with me through this long episode. I promise the rest won't be this long. But until next week, remember to stay aware, stay strong, and get involved. See you then.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC. Your host is Scott Pogensey, and your writer is C. Derick Miller. The theme music for the American Justice Podcast has been created and composed by Josh DeRosa. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First, and most preferred, is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and the city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you would like to blog about the show, then you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and tell us what you think there. You can find many of the documents discussed in this episode there as well. If you are a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at @AJusticePodcast. If you would like to support the show, you can do so in a couple different ways. First, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/AJPodcast. We have different levels of support that include t-shirts, guest call-in spots, and early access to our podcast and YouTube shows. Next, you can like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications of when we publish episodes. We would also very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review. If you have any comments about the show, or more importantly, any tips on the case we're discussing, please call 972-942-0444 and leave us a message. After all, if the subject of our podcast is innocent, that means someone out there is guilty. American Justice Army? Let's find them.